everybody, it's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for my monthly favourites of 2023. So I do already have a book awards video where I give out awards to various different books that I loved from different genres, books that surprised me the most, my favourite adaptations, and my best book of the year. So if you want to know my favourites of those categories, then I will link it down below and you can go and check that out. In this video, I'm going to go through and look at each month and talk about what my favourites were from each month. So some of the books that I talk about in the video I just mentioned will appear in this list and some of them won't, because obviously some months I may have read multiple books that I really loved, and some months I might have a favourite that didn't quite manage to be the favourite of that genre or category or something like that. So anyway, that's the plan for today. So in theory, that would mean that I have 12 books to talk to you today, but I actually have 4 honourable mentions because I did put aside an extra space in my reading journal. I will be doing a flip through in the next few days, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. But anyway, I did keep some extra spaces for favourites for books that might have been amazing, that I loved, but that weren't quite the favourite for that month, and there ended up being 4 of those. So I'm going to talk about those first, and then I'll go through and talk about all the books that were favourites from each month. So my 4 honourable mentions. First up, we have Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. This book is the first in what is going to actually now be a trilogy. It is a contemporary queer romance. We follow Oliver and Luke. Oliver is seemingly a very kind of straight-laced character, and Luke is a sort of socialite party animal, son of a former rock star. The two of them end up fake dating because Luke is trying to save his reputation, and it's suggested to him that he can do that by dating someone and proving himself to be like able to settle down. And his friend suggests Oliver, who actually knows and can't stand, but they end up deciding to go ahead with it anyway. Oliver has his own reasons as well, which I actually can't remember, but they made sense in the book. And yeah, it's fake dating, which I don't normally like very much, but I feel like Alexis Hall pulled it off really well. And the relationship that they form as a result of spending a lot of time together because they're fake dating, so in order to kind of prove to the world that they are dating, they end up spending a lot of time together, and it turns out they actually get along really well, and they end up forming a genuine connection and a genuine relationship. I thought this one was very well written. I really enjoyed, like I said, the writing style. I really thought that Alexis Hall was able to pull off fake dating and bit of an enemies to lovers incredibly well, and I really enjoyed the connection between the two and their banter. There was a lot of banter in this book, but it worked really well between the two characters. They're both kind of snarky at each other to begin with, then developing into closeness and affection and love. I thought worked out really well. There's more to it than that. It's not just straight up enemies to lovers. There's a little bit more going on than that in terms of what each of them want and their feelings for each other and in general. But yeah, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was fantastic. I definitely want to read more from Alexis Hall. There is another book that's been published called Husband Material, and then there's another book coming out in 2024 called Father Material. So I really do want to catch up and read Husband Material and then continue on. At some point I will get around to doing that. But yeah, my first honourable mention is Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. The next honourable mention is Perry Angel's Suitcase by Glenda Milland. This is it's not even middle grade, it's younger even than that. It's a young reader book that I ended up reading for a vlog that I did where some of the students in a class that I was teaching for a term chose some books for me to read, and this was one of them. And it was beautiful. It absolutely blew me away. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I found it heartbreaking and beautiful and very tender and just perfect for those young readers. It deals with some quite hard-hitting topics, but does so in a beautiful way that I think will really work for young readers. It doesn't go into too much detail, but it makes it very clear that Perry Angel has suffered some trauma. So the book is told in kind of a little bit of an odd way, because we are actually given the story from the perspective of a friend of this family. She absolutely adores the family, but the family are themselves considered a little bit strange by the townspeople where they live, just because they are quite a unconventional family. They are huge. There's about 6 or 7 children. The parents are very kind of free and artistic, and it seems like they don't really have many boundaries. The character whose perspective we're in calls the place where they live and the family in general the Kingdom of Silk, and they're very kind of loving and but very kind of free, and yeah, like I said, there doesn't seem to be that many boundaries, but it actually works really well. The kids are really well loved, but they kind of just, it's very ramshackle. The family's very ramshackle, the home is very ramshackle, and so on. And into this kingdom comes Perry Angel. Perry Angel is a foster child. He is about 7 or 8, and he has this suitcase which he will not relinquish, will not let go of at all. You slowly learn throughout the story what Perry has been through and how much trauma he has suffered, and it's about the family making him at home and helping him to deal with those feelings and deal with that trauma. And it was just absolutely beautiful. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought it was very moving. It made me cry. So yeah, that was definitely a top book. Not quite of that particular month, but definitely one of my favourites of 2023. The next book is A Day, a Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This is a prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree. It takes place about 400 years prior to the Priory. I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. It is a massive book. It is so incredibly well written. The world building is phenomenal. The characters are incredible. I think Samantha Shannon is an amazing writer. I love the way that she weaves in all these different storylines and different characters. She has this huge, great world, and there's people from different parts of the world. We get to see so much of the world and the cultures in the world, and how the actual landscape shaped those cultures and their belief structures, and how that causes what their reactions to things. It's just amazing, and how that's all weaved together into one storyline is incredible. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Like I said, I think Samantha Shannon is just incredible. I don't really know how to describe the book. It's epic fantasy. It deals with political upheaval. It deals with dragons. It deals with death and destruction and trying to save the world. And yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say, but it's absolutely phenomenal. Amazing book. The reason this is not a favourite of a particular month is because I actually read it over several months, so I didn't really feel like it fitted into one specific month. But it was definitely a favourite of 2023. The final book that is an honourable mention is Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. This is a non-fiction book. This is actually my only non-fiction book. I finished it on the final day of 2023, and I found it absolutely amazing. I think that I'm going to do a dedicated review for this one, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about this, but I'll just say that if you are Australian, you should read this book. I mean, in general, you should read this book, but particularly if you are Australian. In this book, Bruce Pascoe essentially throws out all of our misconceptions about what the Indigenous people of Australia were like, how they lived on the land, how their connection and relationship to the land, whether they did or did not do any agriculture, whether they altered the land, and whether they farmed at all. It throws all of that completely out the window and says, here's some evidence to suggest that everything we've been told is wrong. And not just wrong, but deliberately wrong. We were deliberately lied to. It was in the best interest of European settlers that they entirely reinvent the way that they reinvent Indigenous people in terms of what we think of how they lived, and the justification behind taking over their land is a terrible justification all by itself, but it is that they didn't really look after the land. They didn't farm, they didn't husband the land, they just were hunter-gatherer, and they, you know, wandered around and just hunted when they needed to, and that was it. They didn't do anything with the land, so it didn't really belong to them, so therefore it was fine that Europeans took it, which is a terrible excuse. But Bruce Pascoe offers evidence that is very compelling and very much suggests that that is incorrect, that European engagement with the land, European taking over the land and attempting to have their own farming, their specifically English ways of farming in Australia, changed the landscape very much and made it unsustainable, and that there was much evidence to suggest that Indigenous people were farming the land. They were just doing it very sustainably and fitting in with the way that Australia and our climate and our soil and everything is. And this book just blew my mind. Honestly, there are so many things that I grew up believing, being taught, and even when you, like I said, even when you know that the justification is really terrible, that's what you're told. You still just think, oh well, you know, so what if that's how they lived? We shouldn't have taken it anyway. But that's not even true of how they lived. It's very compelling. It really messes with your head, and I was blown away, and I couldn't do anything but give it 5 stars because it's amazing. So like I said, I think I'm going to do a dedicated review. Please do comment below if that's something that you'd be interested in, but definitely one of my honourable mentions of 2023 is Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. I really should probably stop saying an honourable mention because, let's be honest, these are favourites as well. They just weren't favourites of that particular month in which I read them. So I'm going to go through now and talk about my favourites from January through to December. So first up, in January, you will not be surprised if you watched my Book Awards video. My favourite book of 2023 entirely is the book that I read in January, and it has not been knocked off its perch. It was my favourite of January and it's my favourite of the year, and that is Fable by R.F. Kuang. This book is phenomenal. I absolutely adored this book. It is so hard to figure out how to talk about this book because I feel like it doesn't fit into any one specific genre. So this is historical fiction. It takes place in the late 19th century mostly in the UK. It is set in Oxford University and there is some magic. So it is part fantasy, part historical fiction, part dark academia. Although I've heard people describe things as light academia recently, and I think that probably fits it more. Although there are definitely dark things happening, they are not the same as the dark academia setting where you have some kind of internal group dynamics that is dark. This is dark from the world. Sorry if the angle has changed, my battery died, so we have a new battery. Anyway, so I was talking about Fable. Don't quite know where I got up to when it cut out, but I was just talking about the fact that it is dark academia in the sense that there are some dark things in the book and it takes place in an academic setting. It's not as internalized as much dark academia is. It's much more about globalism and about imperialism and colonialism. Like I said, it is phenomenally written. I absolutely adored this book. I thought it was incredibly smart. I thought that all the themes and topics that R.F. Kuang was tackling were done incredibly well. I thought that, yeah, it was just amazing and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. We follow Robin, who is rescued from Beijing when he's a very young child from the plague, and brought over to the UK and is brought up by a professor at Oxford University, and he is raised to be a linguist at Oxford University. The magic in this world is based on language and the way that language works, the way that language evolves, the way that words have different meanings in different languages. It is just so intricate and so clever, and that part blew me away as well. Like the whole thing just absolutely blew me away. I just can't recommend this book enough. I think it's fantastic and yeah, absolutely loved it. 5 out of 5 stars, 10 out of 10, everything, just all the accolades. Love this book. In February, I read my favourite retelling of 2023. I have read quite a few retellings in 2023, much of which were Greek mythology retellings. There is a video coming out in January which will explain a little bit more about a project that I was doing that was involving Greek mythology retellings. So I did read quite a few in 2023, but my favourite by far was Electra by Jennifer Saint. I absolutely adored this book. I thought it was very clever. Again, I thought it was really well written. I love the way Jennifer Saint writes. I love the way that she really puts a lot of heart and character into these stories. This book was a story of the Trojan War, and we follow 3 different perspectives. We follow Electra, as the name suggests. We follow Clytemnestra and we follow Cassandra, and we get their perspectives on how they were affected by the war, what happened to them as a result of the war, and how what happened to them changed who they were and made them the characters that they are in Greek myth, which I thought was absolutely phenomenal. I don't think that the thesis of what Jennifer Saint was trying to do was to make a feminist retelling, but by centering those characters and by giving them a storyline and a backstory and some understanding and explanation, I feel like that does make it a feminist retelling. I thought the characters were incredibly well written and really well realized on the page. I just loved this book and I thought it was absolutely phenomenal, and it doesn't hurt that many of the books that I'm talking about have beautiful covers, as does Electra. It is incredible. So that was my favourite for February. Then in March, I read Riviera Gold by L'Oreal King. This is the 16th, I believe, book in the Mary Russell series. The series overall is a Sherlock Holmes retelling. We follow the main character of Mary Russell. In this particular book, Mary has gone to the French Riviera and there is a mystery to be solved, and they solve it. Mary is one of my favourite characters of all time. She is incredibly intelligent. She's very feisty. She is very much a force to be reckoned with, and I love the way that L'Oreal King writes her character. I love the way L'Oreal King writes characters in general. I love the way she writes Sherlock Holmes and all of the other characters that we know and love from the canon, and I love her perspective on the retelling of Sherlock Holmes. Her mysteries are always fantastic and really well woven together, and yeah, this was just a phenomenal book and it was absolutely my favourite of March. In April, my favourite book was The Skylark's Secret by Fiona Valpy. This was historical fiction. It was following 2 different characters and 2 different timelines. So the first character was a woman who I have forgotten her name, but she is a musician and she moves to London and in musical theatre, and she moves to London to pursue her career, and then she falls pregnant and her partner isn't interested, doesn't want to have anything to do with that. So she goes back to Scotland to live in her whole old family home with her daughter, but her mother has passed away. Her mother passed away while she was in London. They had a little bit of it wasn't a bad relationship, it just was a bit of a strained relationship, and so the daughter doesn't go back. She goes back for the funeral, I think, but you kind of get the sense throughout the book that she wishes she'd gone back earlier, spent some time with her mother. And then the other timeline you follow is the mother and when she was young and her relationship with this woman's father and how that all developed and what happened between them. And I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. I thought, again, the characters were really well written. I loved the way that Fiona Valpy built the world, and I love the way that she set it in that historical time, Second World War, and 20 or so years later. So just thought it was absolutely beautiful, and yeah, highly recommend if you like historical fiction. This one is definitely one that I would recommend that you read. So yeah, that was April. Moving into May, and my favourite book of May was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is another historical fantasy, and I read quite a few of those in 2023. I think I've probably read quite a few of those in my life in general, but I've discovered throughout the course of 2023 that it is a subgenre that I really love, and this was the one that I read in May, like I said, and absolutely adored. We follow a young woman who, when she is 6 or 7, a fairy takes half of her soul. From then on, she doesn't really, her way of thinking, her way of approaching the world isn't typical. And it is, basically the book is coded neurodiverse. The main character is autistic. I've heard from a number of different Own Voices reviewers that this was done really, really, really well, and that the coding is because of the time period rather than because the author didn't want to come out and say why, you know, that the character was autistic, and that it was really well done. I am not autistic, I'm neurotypical, and so I can't speak to the authenticity of it, but I've heard that it was really authentic. I personally found it really well written, and I thought that those sections of the story were very well done. So yeah, that's what I've heard, and I, for myself, for my limited knowledge, I do tend to agree with that. But overall, I thought it was a really fun story. We deal with a fairyland, and it is historical fiction, like I said, set in the UK, in London, and yeah, just absolutely beautiful, really whimsical writing style, and really, really smart. In June, my favourite book was The Flat Shair, which is a reread for me. I know that some people don't count rereads as favourites, but I can't help it. I love this book. It is so fantastic. I have read almost all of Beth O'Leary's books now, and I have to say her debut was absolutely my favourite. This is a story that sounds really silly on paper, but it is about Leon and Tiffy, and we'd get both their different perspectives, which I thought was really, really well done. You can definitely see the difference in the characters, which is fantastic. I think that sometimes can be quite difficult. Leon works in an aged care facility and he does the night shift. He is a little bit low on money and he needs some more. He needs to help his brother out, and so he puts up an ad, which is a little bit strange because the ad is that he will rent out his flat and his bed to someone who works during the day, because he's there during the day because he works at night, and so the other person will have the flat at night and they'll be out of the flat in the day. So they will share a bed, but they won't ever see each other, and the idea is that they will never meet, they will never see each other. Tiffy is in quite a tight spot. She's just broken up with her boyfriend and she's having to move out, and so she ends up deciding to take this position, even though it's a little bit unconventional. They're not supposed to meet each other, but they start writing little post-it notes to each other, and the story flourishes from there. I think it's incredibly well written. I love the way Beth O'Leary talked about trauma and the effects of trauma and how you can experience something and not even realize you're experiencing it, and the shock of finding out what that did to you post the experience and realizing it's trauma, if that makes sense. I thought that was incredibly well done. I love both characters. Like I said, I think it's fantastic the way that Beth O'Leary can differentiate between the two, and yeah, loved this book. So glad I reread it, and definitely my favourite of June. Next up in July, my favourite book was another retelling. Not my favourite retelling of the year, but definitely up there, and that is The Silence of the Girls. This is the first book in a duology by Pat Barker. So we have The Silence of the Girls and The Women of Troy. And this again is a retelling of the Trojan War. This book we follow Briseis predominantly. We do follow a couple of other characters as well as Briseis, but we mostly follow Briseis. So the story of the Iliad starts when the Greeks have just conquered a Trojan city, not Troy, but another Trojan city, and they've taken in a bunch of slaves. And one of the slaves is, I cannot remember how to say her name. I think it's Calchas or something along those lines. She is the daughter of a priest of Apollo. The priest comes into the camp and begs for his daughter back. The daughter has been given as a prize to Agamemnon, who is like the leader of the kings of Greece, and he just is flat out refuses and basically beats up the priest and tells him to bugger off. So the priest goes, but then there is a plague visited on the Greek camp, and so many men start getting really sick and dying. Many people beg Agamemnon to give this woman back to her father, he refuses until eventually it becomes like he has no option. Everyone's going to die if he doesn't do something. So he demands that Achilles gives his prize, which is Briseis, to him, and then to make up for him losing his. So this is what happens. Briseis is given to Achilles. This book, The Silence of the Girls, is about Briseis and about that story. What happens to her when, first of all, she's given to Achilles, and then she's taken from Achilles, she's given to Agamemnon, and then eventually she's given back to Achilles, and how being a prize feels, what it's like to be to be in a camp, to be a slave in a camp, to be considered a prize of war. It was just so heart-wrenching. It was so incredibly well written. I just thought it was amazing the way that she was able to give a real depth to this character that we really only see a very small amount of in the Iliad, and I just thought it was absolutely phenomenal. And yeah, thoroughly enjoyed this book, even though it was heart-wrenching. I did also thoroughly enjoy the second book, The Women of Troy, but Silence of the Girls just beat it. Just. Then we have August. And in August, my favourite book was another R.F. Kuang, and that was Yellowface. This one is quite different from Fable. Yellowface is a contemporary literary fiction. It is about the publishing industry in essence. We follow a woman called June, and June is friends with another woman called Athena, both of whom are authors, but June is kind of a fairly middling author. She's been published, but she's not particularly widely known, whereas Athena is just on the up. Her latest novel is being turned into a Netflix special or show, I'm not sure, and she's just going from win to win. They go out one night to celebrate, and Athena's talking about this new project she's working on. She's always very secretive about her projects, but these two happen to be kind of critiquing buddies, so they have worked together in the past. So she's talking to June about what this book is about, and then right in front of June, she dies. She chokes and dies. And June takes the book and passes it off as her own. But Athena is Japanese American, and June is not. And June kind of changes a little bit about herself and pretends to basically have no particular identity in order to be able to publish this book and not be seen as ripping off another culture's experiences. And yeah, it's really fascinating. It was incredibly well written. Again, I love the way the characters were written. I didn't actually like the characters very much, but I did really enjoy the way that they were written, and the discussion about racism, about that whole conversation around whether you should or shouldn't be able to write about something that you didn't experience, and just, yeah, all those sorts of things was absolutely phenomenal. Thoroughly enjoyed this book. Highly recommend, as I do with all of these books. In September, I read another historical fantasy, which I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed, and that book is The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I love Alex E. Harrow's writing style. This is my second book of hers, and I have another of hers on my TBR shelf. I'm really excited to get to it, hopefully very soon. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It is historical fantasy. It is set in sometime in the 19th century, late 19th century, I believe, in something that they're calling New Salem. It centres around the suffragette movement, but also around witches' power and trying to bring back witch power and magic. So the two kind of tie in together. We follow three sisters who all have magical powers, and yeah, it's about that and about them coming up against the law, and it is very feminist and just fantastic. Like I said, absolutely thoroughly enjoyed. I think that Alex E. Harrow has an amazing writing style. I love the way she writes characters, and just phenomenal. Beautiful, beautiful book. Absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. In October, my favourite book was actually the final book of the Rainwild Chronicles. The Rainwild Chronicles were my favourite fantasy books overall in 2023, but my favourite book of October specifically was Blood of Dragons. This is the final book in the Rainwild Chronicles. The Rainwild Chronicles is the fourth series within an overarching series, which is the Realm of the Elderlings. So I'm not going to go into any amount of detail because I don't want to spoil anything, but I will just say that Robin Hobb is an absolute master of writing incredible, incredible, epic fantasy that will just blow your mind and tear your heart out and just leave you just wanting more and more and more. Absolutely phenomenal. Her world building is immaculate. Her characters are impeccable. I love Robin Hobb. I love everything that I've read of hers, and yeah, just incredible. My favourite book of October was definitely Blood of Dragons. In November, my favourite book was The Boy from the Mish by Gary Loansborough. This is a young adult contemporary. It is about a young boy called, well, a young adult really. He's in his sort of late teens, I think, called Jackson. Jackson is an Indigenous boy in Australia and he lives on a mission in country New South Wales. It's around Christmas time and his aunt is coming to stay with all of his cousins, also with a boy around Jackson's age called Thomas. Thomas has just recently been released from juvie and he has to share a room with Jackson. It is about these two boys getting to know one another and finding love. And it is also about how to be queer and come out as queer in Indigenous Australian society. I thought this was incredibly well written. Again, I love the characters. Are we sensing a theme? I thought they're incredibly believable and just phenomenally well written. I really felt like I was in the head of Jackson and I was really experiencing what he was experiencing, and yeah, it was just beautiful. I just absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. Highly recommend. Beautiful, beautiful book. And then my final favourite of 2023 that I read in December is Heartstopper Volume 5. Another young adult contemporary about two boys in high school falling in love. This is a graphic novel. This is the 5th in the graphic novel series Heartstopper, and I just love this series. If you've been around on my channel for any length of time, you will know I love the TV show adaptation. I love the graphic novel series. I love Nick and Charlie. I think Alice Oseman is an incredible author. They write beautiful characters. These boys are so sweet and so wholesome. It's just phenomenal. They also managed to write some really difficult topics incredibly well, and I love that as well. And yeah, Heartstopper, just incredible, and I was very excited to pick up number 5 and read number 5 in December. And that's the end of the list. Those are my favourites from every month in 2023. So yeah, that's the end of the video. Please comment below if you have any thoughts on any of the books that I talked about. What are your favourites from any or all of these months? What was your favourite book of the year? If you have any books that you'd like to recommend on the strength of what books I've said are my favourites, that would be amazing. But yeah, leave all those things in the comments below. If you'd like to leave me a comment but you don't know what, then leave me some kind of happy smiley face, because we're happy and smiley about my favourites of the year. All of my social media details are listed in the description below, so if you'd like to go and follow me on any of those other platforms, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.